Good evening, everyone. My grandfather was a mason. He made chimneys, he laid brick, did all that sort of thing, and this was the kind of tool that he would have used early in his career. My mother actually got a couple of these brick carriers several years ago to use as, kind of decorative things, kind of in remembrance to my grandfather. And I've had this particular one in my little shop for, I want to say at least 3 or 4 years, maybe longer. And just dawned on me that it would be a really great, simple restoration where I could try a few different things and kind of go for more of a showpiece style versus kind of my normal restoration, which is a tool that I want to use frequently. I might use this in the future. I'm not really sure. I'm not super worried about it functioning. I just want it to look really cool. The teardown was really pretty simple. There's just mostly some bolts holding everything together. A lot of the mechanical connections are actually peened over with steel rods. I didn't really mess with those. I wasn't too super worried about them. You can see here I'm using a wire brush because there's mortar on the tool. So a lot of that I had to break off and scrape off. It hadn't been disassembled in God knows how long. So I had to use some penetrating oil. And, I believe this thing was painted all in one go. So that made some of the different connections a little harder to take apart than kind of I had originally thought. Really, that wood handle there was probably the hardest thing for me to disassemble. And you can see it was gross as I pull out the long threaded bolt there. Just the crap that falls out of that nice, wonderful dust from, 50 years maybe or more. Just all that pouring out of there. When I was thinking about this tool, I was thinking about, I looked up kind of the original paint and what it would have looked like, and it was very plain, and I kind of had a vision for souping it up a little bit and making it a little bit more fancy, as you'll see later on. There was a lot, like I said, of mortar that was stuck to it, so I used a nail and a file just to take all that stuff down to get back to the bare metal. You can kind of see here the technique I'm using. Simple stuff. And it had a lot of old paint. I just wanted to strip that off. I made a pretty sizable mistake here. Didn't read the instructions on the paint stripper. If you leave it out, you should wrap it in plastic, and I did not do that, and so the paint stripper dried and it didn't do a very good job. I'm going to try this paint stripper again, actually following the instructions. So it really just took a lot of work after using the paint stripper to get all the paint off. There was paint on the handle too. You can see here there was some cracks in it, and what I did was I filled it in with super glue. I like to use this gel super glue. It just makes applying easier for me because of my shaky hands, and I just use that to fill in those cracks. And right now I'm using a rat tail file to kind of clean out the inside of the handle. It's just horrendous. Chucked it in the handle into my drill, and I'm just using that to sand down, make my life a little easier. I actually thought about remaking the handle in the lathe, but I kind of wanted to just use as many original pieces as possible and not make anything. Here I'm now doing rust removal on all the metal parts, washers and the bolts and nuts, and then the body of the brick carrier. Here I'm just using some dark stain, just kind of making the handle look a little nicer. And back to the wire wheel. I had my first really good wire wheel injury while working on this. I ground down the knuckle on my pointer finger on my left hand. So this was kind of an awkward tool, so I ended up using the drill and the Dremel to take a lot of the rust and old paint. There's a few places where either I don't know if the wing nut here was just marred over time or the casting was bad. I don't really know. So just kind of filed it down just to make it a little bit more pleasing to use and look a little bit better. There were several little places where I just used some file work. And here some of the bolts, the threads were really messed up over time. So just kind of cleaning up those threads, make everything function a little bit better. Soup it up a little bit more, make it a little nicer than it was originally made. and almost all of the connections needed some work with the threads. It just happens over time. Normal wear, really. Probably somebody banged it with a hammer at different times. That's the way tools are. They're meant to be used. And I just did kind of a test fit before paint. And then I used a self-etching primer as a base, give it a few coats of that. And then, looking, this thing was kind of a bright red originally. So I found some kind of red that looked really nice and bright. Here we're painting the casting letters, and my lovely lady is helping me out with that. She's lefty, which makes things nice to shoot. I can't do it because my hands shake way too bad for this kind of fine work. Paste wax finish on everything, all the parts, just to kind of dull out the shininess of them and protect them a little bit more from rust. Now you'll notice I didn't paint everything. There's a few things I thought would look better with just sort of a bare metal, including the rod. The handle I stained versus painting because it was originally painted red. And then some of the pieces that were going to have a lot of contact with bricks, I didn't paint those either because I thought, well, that's just going to wear off over time anyway. Assembly on this, again, it was a really, really simple tool, and because I didn't remove any of the rods and try to repeen them over, that made actually assembly and disassembly super simple. I'm really proud of the way this thing turned out. It's really pretty. It's got an old time look to it, like a classic tool would have, that you just don't see anymore. The stylings, the fonts, the way the casts were made, it's very unique to the time period. Now, I made a mistake here. I corrected later off camera. The washer should be underneath that wing nut, but I'm really pleased with how easy that wing nut threads down in there after cleaning everything up, and obviously not painting over it too. That actually makes everything function really well. So, a little demo. I just found some random bricks I had lying around, and really, really pleased. The paint looks beautiful. My lady did an amazing job on the letters. I like the areas that didn't get paint and were either bare metal or wood, and functions really well.